Hello and welcome to the Church of Basketball. In the last video, we talked about the evolution of NBA basketball as a game played from the inside out to a game played from the outside in. But the question we're asking this time is, how did that happen? As a starting point, and not just for this video but perhaps for the game of basketball as a whole, we can look to the 1992 Olympics and the unprecedented global impact of the original Dream Team. These days we're very much used to seeing US national team rosters filled with all-star level players, but back then it just wasn't a thing. In previous international and Olympic competitions, the United States always used their best collegiate players, which was in keeping with the Olympic ethos of amateur competition. But in 1986, partially because a lot of the world's best athletes were now able to make a living from their sport, and partially in response to countries like the former Soviet Union, who had players competing in their national league on a full-time government-sponsored basis, yet could still be considered amateurs under the communist system. The International Olympic Committee decided to lift their ban on amateur-only participants. However, for the 1988 Games, Team USA, possibly making a statement about their superiority in the sport created almost 100 years previously in Springfield, Massachusetts, still sent a team of college players who, although very talented, had not yet reached their full potential, and they came home with a bronze medal behind fully developed teams, the former Yugoslavia and the former USSR. 4 years later, maybe sensing that the gloves were now off, Team USA assembled a squad comprising the best of the best of the best, and the impact of that decision is still being felt today. When the Dream Team burst onto the Olympic scene, many people watching around the world had never before seen the levels of speed, strength, flashiness and athleticism all on display at the same time. This awe-inspiring spectacle sent a ripple around the world, and perhaps not coincidentally, the host city of those Olympics, Barcelona, became almost ground zero for an explosion of international talent that has continued to grow and spread even further around the globe for the past 3 decades and counting.
We had a dream of playing in the NBA. You know, that 92 Olympic team that came to Barcelona touched many kids' life of my generation. So I was like, wow, these guys are incredible. I want to do that, you know.
It sparked a new level of interest and participation in basketball, particularly across the Mediterranean and eastern regions of Europe, but also as far around the globe as Argentina, Brazil and Australia. However, it also became clear to the rest of the world, particularly in Europe, that prohibited stereotypical advantages aside, they could not compete against the seemingly endless supply of resources and freakish athletic personnel that was available to the USA without developing some kind of edge. Part of this process had already begun prior to the 92 Olympics, as European sport had already undergone somewhat of a renaissance with the emergence of the Dutch concept of total football in the 1970s. Made famous by their international teams led by Johan Cruyff, the goal was to create a positionless brand of soccer where all players were interchangeable across the pitch. European basketball had begun to adopt this philosophy, going away from the more traditional American model where point guards passed, shooting guards shot, small forwards slashed to the rim and big men posted up. Instead, all players were taught all skills regardless of position, with guards learning to post up and big men learning to shoot from the outside. No matter what their size or their level of speed, the best European basketball players grew up knowing how to shoot, how to pass, and how to handle the ball. But this foundation built on individual skill still wasn't enough. To maximise those skills as a team, a tactical advantage was also needed, and one of the most significant examples of this was the development of the European ball screen offense. When former Team USA head coach Mike Krzyzewski went on a scouting trip to Europe, he observed the use of this system and made note of the appropriate court spacing, accurate passing, great three-point shooting and dedicated use of the ball screen. So, to try and explain this as quickly and simply as possible, these are the basics of how that works. At the core of this strategy is what's now most commonly known as the spread pick and roll, which, as the name suggests, has the 3 players not involved in the screening spread out as far as possible on the wing and, in this example, the deep corners. With this kind of spacing, maximising the size of the court, which in FIBA rules is smaller than the NBA, and forcing defenders to cover more ground. At the point of attack, the pick and roll typically combines the biggest player with the best ball handler and decision maker, where the big vacates the paint to set a screen, preferably at or beyond the 3-point line. This screen action means the defense now has to make a decision, because if the screener's defender stays with the ball, it opens up the lane for a roll to the rim. If the screener's defender stays on him, it opens up the lane for the ball handler to drive. If he holds his position while the ball handler's defender fights over the top of the screen, then, since international big men can generally shoot from the outside, it opens up space for the screener to pop out and take the shot. If he leaves space for the guard to go under the screen to meet his man on the other side, it gives the ball handler room to take the shot himself. And if they simply switch, this will likely create a mismatch opportunity where the smaller player will have a speed advantage, or the bigger player will have a height advantage. Without getting too bogged down by details, there are also many variations, like the side pick and roll, when all 3 weak side players are on the same side of the court, or dribble handoffs in place of the screen. Whichever way an advantage is gained, the defenders away from the ball then have to leave their man and help, which creates a domino effect where gaps in the defense begin to appear, the defenders are now scrambling to close those gaps, and the offense is looking to exploit them when they don't. At this point, seeking out an advantage as a group generates opportunities for ball and player movement, which requires accurate passing and the ability to knock down open shots whenever or wherever they become available. Fundamentally, the idea is to make the game of basketball into less of an athletic contest and more like a game of chess. And as time has gone by, this cerebral emphasis has made its way into the general lexicon of basketball, so that, for example, if you run a 2-man pick and roll and then have a third player immediately set a back screen for the screener, no matter where in the world you are, this is known as a Spain pick and roll, due to it being developed and utilised to great effect in the Spanish domestic league and by their national teams on the global stage. This tactical acumen resulted in a more level international playing field when 10 years after the Dream Team's original dominance, 3 major tournaments in a row were won by teams outside of the USA, with Yugoslavia, Argentina and Spain achieving gold in the World Cup, Olympics and then World Cup respectively. Now, you may be asking, what does any of this have to do with the NBA? Well, I'm glad you asked. Obviously, there are many factors and variables which contribute to the evolution of anything, especially over a long period of time. But with basketball, a key development came about when an American point guard with Italian heritage took a chance on pursuing his professional career overseas. When Mike D'Antoni's NBA journey never really got started, he took the opportunity to play in Italy, signing for Olimpia Milan and staying there for 13 seasons, eventually ending up as the club's all-time leading scorer, first in steals, assists and 3-pointers, all records which still stand to this day. In the process, he won 5 Italian league titles, 2 Euro League titles, 1 Euro Cup, 2 Italian Cups, and had his jersey retired in 2015. After becoming such a beloved and iconic player for the club, D'Antoni then made the natural transition into coaching, where his standard of achievement continued as he progressed from team player to tactician. As the head coach of Milan and then Benetton Treviso, he won a combined 2 Italian league titles, 2 Euro Cup championships and an Italian Cup. With a highly impressive European resume under his belt, he returned to America in the early 2000s, went back and forth holding a few different roles before being handed a head coaching opportunity with the Phoenix Suns. It was here that he decided to run an experiment, where he essentially asked what would happen if you combine the spacing principles of the European spread ball screen offense with the super athletes on hand in the NBA. Bringing in some internationally developed talent and signing a player in Steve Nash who, beyond just the physical similarities, was reminiscent of Johan Cruyff in the sense A, he was the son of an English professional footballer and grew up playing the sport, which had certain attributes that transferred very well to basketball.
You know, what a great sport soccer is, because it truly is. I mean, even if a basketball player wants to do some cross training, that's the best sport for basketball, to do cross training, because you get your conditioning, you also get your foot speed and footwork in, which helps me out a lot.
And B, he was part of a generation of guards who, as mentioned in the previous video, weren't just facilitators who set up other people, but also weren't just scorers who looked for their own shot. They functioned as both. In his time with the Suns, Nash registered several seasons where he led the league in assists, while also being part of the 50-40-90 club, a set of shooting percentages that have been achieved by an extremely small group of players over multiple seasons. With a point guard in his own image, an offense based on creating extra space on the court, the speed and explosiveness of his players, and the previous tendency of the NBA to get everything set up before seeking to exploit individual mismatches, D'Antoni put extra emphasis on pace, looking to flow straight into ball screens as quickly as possible. And the result of this experiment is what became known as the 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns. Within a roster of long, athletic, outside shooting and defensively versatile wings, the fulcrum was a big man in Amari Stoudemire who, although not quite operating at three-point range, which was still a big no-no for NBA centers back then, was still highly effective in what's now known as the short roll, where instead of rolling all the way to the rim, the screener can also limit their roll to the foul line area, taking advantage, again helped by the size of an NBA court, of the space created when the guard turns the corner and drives to occupy the help defense. Because if you sat back in the paint, the short roll would open up a jump shot. And if you didn't, well... And while this style led to multiple highlights, a reputation as the most entertaining team in the league, a Coach of the Year award for D'Antoni, 2 MVPs for Nash, and a 6th Man of the Year award for Leandro Barbosa, there was an overriding criticism that this style of play would never win you a championship. Now, there is definitely an argument to be made that if not for a set of newly introduced harsh penalties by the NBA, following the Malice in the Palace brawl between Detroit and Indiana, and a hard foul on Nash in the 2007 playoffs, which meant essential players Boris Diaw and Amari Stoudemire were suspended for simply stepping on the court, even though they were not involved in the scuffle that followed. Had they made the finals, they would have gone up against a Cleveland team led, and by led I mean carried, by a not quite yet ready LeBron James coming out of a much weaker Eastern Conference. However,
if my aunt had nuts, she'd be my uncle.
So, as far as history shows, it must be said that Mike D'Antoni's particular version of the spread pick and roll, while entertaining to watch, is not conducive to winning championships. And this idea was not helped many years later when the D'Antoni coached Houston Rockets suffered an all-time three-point drought in a Game 7 against the Warriors, with it placing so much emphasis on the offensive end of the floor, as the old NBA saying goes, defense wins championships. But with the NBA being a copycat league,
I think the NBA is a very copycat league.
The more open-minded teams were paying attention. And to see how that changed the NBA forever, please join us again in part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like, and if you're feeling generous, maybe follow us on the socials. Until next time,
I'll say church, priest, tabernacle.